You should be thanking me, honestly. That old building was just sitting there rotting. My sister's voice cut through the phone like she was doing me the biggest favor of my life. I stood in my kitchen in Denver, Colorado, watching the morning light filter through the blinds while Victoria rambled on about her latest act of supposed generosity. My name is Fiona. I am 35 years old, and I have spent the better part of my adult life being invisible to my own family. Not invisible in the tragic, cinematic sense where someone cries in the rain. Invisible in the way that matters most. They simply never thought to ask what I actually did for a living, who I really was, or why certain things in my life were not up for discussion. Victoria had always been the star. 2 years younger than me, she had the kind of personality that filled every room she entered. Loud, confident, and utterly convinced that the world owed her something for simply existing. Our parents adored her. She was the one who threw the parties, dated the interesting men, and always had a story that made everyone laugh at Sunday dinners. Me? I was the quiet one, the one who showed up, nodded politely, and left before dessert. They called me boring. They called my job something with paperwork because I never corrected them. I let them believe I was some mid-level bureaucrat pushing papers in a dusty government office because the truth was none of their business. Fiona, are you even listening to me? I blinked, pulling myself back to the conversation. I'm here. What were you saying? I said I sold that old storage building, the one out past the highway, the one you inherited from Uncle Gerald. My blood ran cold, but I kept my voice steady. You did what? Sold it. Got $420,000 for it, can you believe that? Some developer wanted the land. I handled everything. Found the buyer, signed the papers, the whole thing. You're welcome. I gripped the edge of my kitchen counter so hard my knuckles turned white. Uncle Gerald had not left me a storage building. Uncle Gerald had left me something far more complicated, something I had been monitoring for the past 8 years as part of my actual job, a job that had nothing to do with paperwork and everything to do with national security. Victoria, I said slowly, that property was not yours to sell. She laughed. The sound grated against my ears like nails on a chalkboard. Oh, come on. You never used it. You never even talked about it. I figured you forgot it existed. Besides, family shares everything, right? Mom and Dad always said that. What's yours is mine. What's mine is yours. That had always been the rule in our family, but only when it benefited Victoria. When I needed help with college tuition, no one shared anything. When I worked 2 jobs to afford my first apartment, no one offered a dime. But when Victoria needed money for her failed boutique, her disastrous wedding, her endless stream of bad investments, suddenly the family coffers were open and everyone was expected to contribute. I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said. That building was not a storage facility. You need to tell me exactly who you sold it to and when the transaction was completed. Why are you being so dramatic? This is exactly why no one tells you anything. You always make everything into some huge crisis. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. She had no idea what she had done. None of them ever did. Victoria, when did you sign the papers? 3 days ago. Why does it matter? The money's already in my account. 3 days. That meant the unauthorized transfer had likely already triggered alerts in systems she could not even imagine existed. I needed to make calls, file reports, and prepare for what was about to become an absolute disaster. But first, I needed to understand how deep this went. How did you even access the paperwork? The deed was in my name. She hesitated for just a moment. I had to get creative. You know how these things work. A little signature here, a little notary there. It's not like you were using it. She had forged my signature. My sister had committed fraud to sell government property she knew nothing about, pocketed nearly $500,000, and was now acting like she had done me a favor. The audacity was almost impressive. I have to go, I said flatly. Wait, Fiona, you're not mad, are you? I was going to split it with you, eventually, maybe after I paid off some things. I hung up without answering. Standing alone in my quiet kitchen, I felt something shift inside me. For years, I had protected my family from the reality of my work. I had let them believe I was boring, unimportant, forgettable. I had done this to keep them safe, to keep classified information compartmentalized, to maintain the security protocols I had sworn to uphold. And what had they done with that protection? They had used it to dismiss me, overlook me, and apparently steal from me. The phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. Sold that old storage building for $420K. Put the money into something for myself. Don't be mad. I stared at the screen, feeling the weight of what was coming settle into my bones. She thought she had won. She thought this was just another moment where she got what she wanted and I rolled over. She had no idea what she had just set in motion. Growing up in our family meant understanding the hierarchy early. Victoria was the sun, and the rest of us were expected to orbit around her warmth and brightness. Our mother, Patricia, practically glowed whenever Victoria walked into a room. Our father, Howard, funded her dreams without question, while suggesting I find a practical career that would not require too much imagination. I found that career, just not in the way they expected. After college, I applied to work for the federal government. Not in the glamorous way people imagine, no spy movies or action sequences. I applied for a position in facility oversight, specifically dealing with decommissioned research sites and their ongoing security protocols. It sounded boring because it was supposed to sound boring. That was the point. The job interview was unlike anything I had experienced. Multiple rounds of background checks, polygraph tests, and conversations with people who never gave their full names. By the end of it, I understood that I was being recruited for something that would require me to keep secrets from everyone I loved. I accepted without hesitation. For 12 years, I had monitored off-site facilities that officially did not exist. Research stations, testing grounds, storage facilities for materials that the general public would never know about. My job was to ensure these properties remained secure. Their documentation stayed classified, and any potential breaches were handled before they became problems. Uncle Gerald had been one of my predecessors. When he passed away 8 years ago, he left me his property in his will, a coded transfer that brought me into direct oversight of a facility he had monitored for decades. The building Victoria had just sold was not a storage unit. It was a decommissioned research station that had once housed classified government projects. The land itself was still registered under federal jurisdiction, even though it appeared on civilian maps as privately owned. This was intentional. Many such properties were hidden in plain sight, their true nature obscured by layers of paperwork that made them look like ordinary real estate. It provided cover, reduced suspicion, and ensured that curious neighbors did not ask too many questions about the occasional unmarked van or the security personnel who performed routine checks. Victoria had sold classified government property to an unknown buyer. She had forged documents to do it. And she had done all of this because she saw an opportunity to make money and assumed no one would notice or care. The worst part was that she was partially right. In any normal circumstance, no one in my family would have cared. They barely acknowledged my existence at holiday dinners. They never asked about my job, my life, or my concerns. I was the backdrop against which Victoria's colorful life played out. I remembered the last Christmas we spent together. Victoria had dominated the conversation with stories about her latest business venture, some kind of wellness retreat that had already burned through its initial investment. My parents hung on every word, nodding enthusiastically and offering suggestions. When my mother finally turned to me and asked what was new in my life, I had barely opened my mouth before Victoria interrupted with another anecdote. No one noticed. No one ever noticed. I had learned to use that invisibility to my advantage. The less they knew about me, the safer they were, and the safer I was. Classified work required compartmentalization, and my family's complete lack of interest in my existence made that compartmentalization easy. But Victoria's actions had just blown a hole through every protective barrier I had built. I sat down at my desk and pulled out my secure laptop. The protocols for reporting an unauthorized transfer were straightforward but extensive. I would need to document everything: the timeline, Victoria's method of access, the identity of the buyer, and any potential security implications. The buyer concerned me most. Who would pay $420,000 for a piece of land that looked like nothing special? Either they were a legitimate developer who had no idea what they had purchased, or they were someone who knew exactly what that property was and had been waiting for an opportunity to acquire it. Neither scenario was good. I began typing my initial report, keeping my language clinical and precise. I did not mention that the person who had committed this breach was my sister. I did not mention the years of being overlooked, or the petty resentments that had built up between us. Those details were irrelevant to the security implications. What mattered was that a federally monitored property had been illegally transferred, and I needed to initiate the recovery process before the situation escalated further. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a group text from my mother. Victoria told us the wonderful news. So smart to finally do something with that old eyesore. Dinner Sunday to celebrate? I stared at the message, feeling a familiar numbness spread through my chest. They were celebrating. My family was throwing a dinner party to congratulate Victoria for committing federal crimes. They had no idea what they were cheering for, and part of me wanted to let them find out the hard way. But another part of me, the part that had spent 12 years protecting people who would never appreciate it, knew that I needed to handle this carefully. If I went in too aggressively, Victoria would play the victim. She always did. She would cry. She would manipulate. She would somehow convince everyone that I was overreacting and making her life difficult. I needed to let this unfold in a way that left no room for her usual tactics. I needed documentation, witnesses, and official channels that could not be swayed by her tears or our parents' favoritism. For the first time in years, I felt something other than resignation when I thought about my family. I felt anticipation. The Sunday dinner invitation sat in my phone like a ticking bomb. I had not responded yet, and I knew my silence was being interpreted as sulking. That was fine. Let them think I was upset about being left out of Victoria's big decision. Let them prepare their speeches about how I needed to be more flexible, more generous, more like a real sister. They had no idea what was coming. By Saturday morning, I had completed my initial report and submitted it through the proper channels. The response came faster than I expected. A call from my supervisor at 6 a.m. asking me to confirm the details. "You're certain the transfer was unauthorized?" Douglas asked, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone who had dealt with security breaches before. "Positive. I never signed any documents. My signature was forged by my sister, who believed the property was a personal inheritance rather than a monitored facility." There was a pause on the line. "Your sister?" "Yes, that complicates things." "I'm aware." Douglas sighed. "We'll need to send a team to assess the situation. The buyer needs to be investigated, the property needs to be secured, and your sister will need to provide a statement. Given your relationship to the individual involved, you'll be removed from direct oversight of this case." I had expected that. Conflict of interest was taken seriously in my line of work. "Understood." "Fiona." His voice softened slightly. "I know this must be difficult. Family situations always are. But you did the right thing by reporting it immediately. A lot of people in your position would have tried to handle it quietly." I thought about that for a moment. A lot of people in my position had families who respected them. A lot of people had siblings who would never dream of forging their signature to sell something that did not belong to them. I did not have that luxury. "I'll be available for any follow-up questions," I said simply. "We'll be in touch." After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my apartment and considered my options. I could warn Victoria. I could call her right now and explain exactly how much trouble she was in. I could give her time to prepare, to lawyer up, to spin her usual narrative about how everything was someone else's fault. But why would I do that? For 35 years, I had been the family afterthought. The one who cleaned up messes, covered expenses when things got tight, and never received a single word of thanks. When Victoria's first marriage fell apart, I had let her stay in my apartment for 3 months. When her boutique failed, I had quietly paid off some of her debts so she would not lose her car. When our parents needed home repairs they could not afford, I had written the checks and never mentioned it to anyone. And what had I gotten in return? Dismissal. Condescension. A family that thought so little of me that my own sister felt comfortable forging my signature because she assumed I would never notice or care. No, I was not going to warn her. I was not going to fix this. For the first time in my life, I was going to let Victoria face the consequences of her actions without a safety net. My phone buzzed with another message from her. Mom says you haven't confirmed for dinner. Don't be weird about this, okay? It's just money. I'll share some with you if that's what you're worried about. I typed back a simple response. I'll be there. If I was going to watch this unfold, I wanted a front row seat. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Denver feel like something out of a postcard. I drove to my parents' house in the suburbs, taking my time and enjoying the scenery. The mountains in the distance were dusted with early snow, and the trees along the highway blazed with orange and gold. When I pulled into the driveway, Victoria's car was already there. So was an unfamiliar sedan, probably one of her new friends, someone she had picked up during her latest social climbing expedition. I parked behind my father's truck and sat for a moment, gathering myself. The front door opened before I could reach it. My mother stood there, beaming. There you are. We were starting to think you weren't coming. I said I would be here. Well, you know how you are sometimes. Come in, come in. Victoria has so much to tell you about her plans for the money. I followed her inside, noting the familiar smell of roast chicken and fresh bread. The dining room was set with the good china, which my mother only brought out for special occasions. Apparently, committing federal crimes qualified. Victoria was holding court in the living room, a glass of wine in her hand, and a smile on her face that could have powered a small city. She saw me enter, and immediately launched into her greeting. Fiona, there she is. Don't worry, I'm not mad that you hung up on me. I know you were probably just surprised. Something like that. My father emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Good to see you, sweetheart. Victoria was just telling us about the buyer. Some development company that wants to build condos or something. Smart money, if you ask me. I smiled and said nothing. The dinner conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. Victoria talked about her plans, a trip to Europe, a new car, maybe investing in another business venture. My parents nodded along, offering suggestions and encouragement. No one asked how I felt about my property being sold without my consent. No one seemed to think that was relevant. At one point, my mother turned to me with a look of gentle concern. You've been so quiet tonight. Is everything okay? I looked at her, then at Victoria, then at my father. They were all watching me with the same expression. Mild curiosity, mixed with the expectation that I would simply accept whatever had happened and move on. Everything's fine, I said. I just have a lot on my mind. Victoria laughed. That's Fiona, always overthinking everything. I smiled at her across the table, and for the first time, I let her see something real in my eyes. She stopped laughing. The mood at the table shifted almost imperceptibly after that moment. Victoria continued talking, but there was something uncertain in her voice now, a slight tremor that had not been there before. She had seen something in my expression that unsettled her, even if she could not name it. Good. Anyway, she said, recovering quickly, I think the most important thing is that we're finally doing something productive with that old property. It was just sitting there, collecting dust and costing money in taxes. Now it's going to be turned into something useful. About that, I said, my voice calm and measured. I'm curious how you handled the paperwork. The deed was in my name. The table went quiet. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth. My father reached for his wine glass, suddenly very interested in its contents. Victoria waved her hand dismissively. Oh, you know how these things work. I had to get a little creative. But it's all legal, I made sure of that. Did you? Of course I did. I'm not stupid, Fiona. I tilted my head slightly. So you're saying you consulted with a lawyer who confirmed that forging my signature on legal documents was acceptable? The word forging hung in the air like a bad smell. My mother set down her fork entirely. My father drained his wine glass and reached for the bottle. I didn't forge anything, Victoria said, her voice rising. I just signed on your behalf, as your representative. Were you my legal representative? I'm your sister. That's not the same thing. Victoria's face flushed red. This was not how she had expected the conversation to go. She had anticipated gratitude, or at worst, mild irritation. She had not prepared for calm, direct questions that exposed the holes in her story. Why are you being like this? She demanded. I did you a favor. That building was worthless and I turned it into real money. You should be thanking me. Thanking you for committing fraud? My mother finally intervened. Fiona, that's enough. Victoria was trying to help. There's no need to use such harsh language. I turned to face her. Mom, she forged my signature to sell property that wasn't hers. In what universe is that helping? It's family property, my father said firmly. What belongs to one of us belongs to all of us. That's how we've always operated. The irony was almost too much to bear. When had anything of Victoria's ever been shared with me? When had my contributions to this family ever been acknowledged or reciprocated? But I kept those thoughts to myself. There was no point in arguing family philosophy when federal agents would soon be making the point far more effectively than I ever could. You're right, I said, forcing a smile. Family shares everything. I apologize for being dramatic. Victoria's relief was immediate and visible. See? That's all I wanted. For you to understand that I was trying to do something good. I understand completely. My mother patted my hand. That's my girl. Now, let's enjoy this lovely dinner and talk about something happier. Victoria, tell us more about your trip plans. The conversation moved on, but I could tell Victoria was still rattled. She kept glancing at me throughout the meal, trying to read my expression. I gave her nothing. I had spent years perfecting the art of being invisible, and now I used that invisibility as a weapon. Let her wonder what I was thinking. Let her imagine the worst. After dinner, I helped my mother clear the dishes while my father and Victoria moved to the living room. In the privacy of the kitchen, my mother turned to me with a concerned look. Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but please try to see this from Victoria's perspective. She's been struggling lately. The divorce, the failed business. She needed this win. Can't you just be happy for her? I scrubbed a pot with more force than necessary. Mom, she sold my property without my permission. That's not about her needing a win. That's about her thinking she can take whatever she wants. You're being too hard on her. Sisters should support each other. When has she ever supported me? The question seemed to genuinely puzzle my mother. She stood there for a moment, dishcloth in hand, trying to think of an example. The silence stretched between us, more damning than any argument I could have made. Well, she finally said, she came to your graduation. So did you and Dad. That's what family does. That's not supporting me specifically. You're being difficult. I set down the pot and turned to face her. Mom, I'm not being difficult. I'm pointing out that Victoria has taken from me my entire life, and this is just the latest example. but it doesn't matter. What's done is done. My mother seemed relieved by that conclusion. Exactly. What's done is done. No point in dwelling on it. She had no idea how wrong she was. I stayed for another hour, making polite conversation and watching my family celebrate Victoria's windfall. By the time I left, the sun had set, and the temperature had dropped significantly. I sat in my car for a few minutes, letting the cold air clear my head before starting the drive home. My phone buzzed with a text from my supervisor. Team deployed. Contact with buyer initiated. We'll update you tomorrow. I read the message twice, feeling something shift in my chest. This was really happening. The wheels were in motion, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop them now. As I drove through the dark streets of Denver, I thought about all the times I had protected Victoria from the consequences of her actions. The debts I had paid, the excuses I had made, the boundaries I had let her cross because fighting back was too exhausting and too futile. Not this time. This time, she had crossed a line that I could not ignore and had no power to fix. Even if I wanted to help her, which I did not, there was nothing I could do. The property she had sold was federal jurisdiction, and the people she had sold it to were now under investigation. Whatever happened next was entirely out of my hands. For the first time in years, I felt something like peace. Monday morning arrived with a heaviness that had nothing to do with the weather. I went through my usual routine: coffee, shower, a quick breakfast, while waiting for the call I knew was coming. It arrived at exactly 8:47 a.m. This is Agent Theodore Walsh with the Federal Property Security Division. Am I speaking with Fiona? You are. I'm calling regarding the unauthorized transfer of federal property designated under Code Reference Delta 7 Alpha. I understand you've already filed an initial report. That's correct. We've made contact with the buyer, a development company called Northgate Holdings. They claim they purchased the property in good faith from a woman named Victoria, who presented herself as the legal owner. I closed my eyes. Victoria is my sister. She forged my signature on the transfer documents. We're aware. Our investigation team has confirmed that the signature on the deed transfer does not match your authenticated samples on file. Your sister committed forgery, wire fraud, and illegal sale of federal property. These are serious charges. I understand. Agent Walsh paused. Given your position with the oversight program, I need to ask, did you have any knowledge of your sister's intentions prior to the sale? None. I found out about the transaction after it was completed. And you immediately filed a report? Within hours. Another pause. That's unusual. Most people in your situation would try to handle things quietly, protect their family. I thought about all the times I had protected Victoria, all the messes I had cleaned up, all the mistakes I had covered for. And I thought about the dinner conversation, where my mother had struggled to name a single instance when Victoria had supported me. My sister made choices that have security implications far beyond our family, I said carefully. I take my responsibilities seriously. Understood. We'll need your cooperation in the coming investigation. Your sister will be contacted today and asked to appear for questioning. Given your relationship, you won't be directly involved in that process, but you may be called as a witness. I'll be available. One more thing. The buyer, Northgate Holdings, they're cooperating with our investigation, but we've discovered some concerning connections. The sale may have been more than just an opportunistic real estate deal. We're still piecing things together. My stomach tightened. This was the scenario I had feared, that Victoria had stumbled into something far more dangerous than she realized. A legitimate developer would have been a manageable problem. But if Northgate Holdings had specific interest in acquiring federal property— What kind of connections? I asked. That's classified at this time. But I wanted you to know that this investigation may extend beyond your sister's actions. We appreciate your cooperation. After we hung up, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at the wall. Victoria had thought she was being clever. She had seen an opportunity to make money and grabbed it without considering the consequences. It had never occurred to her that the worthless old building might be worth more than its real estate value. It had never occurred to her that there might be people watching, waiting for exactly this kind of breach. My phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Some government guy called me this morning. What's going on? Is this about the building?" I did not respond. Another text followed quickly. "Fiona? Hello? Why is the federal government asking me questions about a storage unit?" Still no response. The texts kept coming, each one more frantic than the last. "This is serious. They're talking about bringing me in for questioning. What did you do? Call me back right now. And I know you're getting these messages. Mom said you're not answering her either. What is happening?" By noon, my inbox contained 17 unread texts from Victoria, 6 from my mother, and 2 from my father. I read none of them. Whatever they had to say would not change what was coming, and I had no interest in spending my energy on reassurances I could not provide. Instead, I went to work. My day was filled with routine tasks, reviewing reports, attending meetings, updating documentation. None of my colleagues knew about the situation with my sister, and I intended to keep it that way. The investigation was being handled by a separate team, and my involvement was limited to providing background information as requested. At 3 p.m., I received an update from Agent Walsh. "Your sister has agreed to voluntary questioning tomorrow morning at our field office. Legal counsel has been advised." So Victoria had lawyered up. Smart, finally. Maybe someone was explaining to her exactly how serious the situation was. Maybe she was starting to understand that her usual tactics, the tears, the excuses, the blame shifting, were not going to work this time. I thought about calling her. For just a moment, I felt the old instinct kick in, the urge to fix things, to smooth things over, to make the problem go away. It was such a familiar feeling, so deeply ingrained that it almost felt like love. But it was not love. It was conditioning. It was years of being taught that my job in this family was to serve Victoria's needs while ignoring my own. It was the expectation that I would always sacrifice, always accommodate, always forgive. Not anymore. I put my phone away and went back to work. That evening, I made myself a simple dinner and watched the sunset from my living room window. The mountains were pink and gold in the fading light, and for a few peaceful moments, I forgot about everything else. Just me and the view, existing in quiet solitude. The knock on my door at 7 p.m. shattered that peace. I opened it to find my mother standing in the hallway, her face streaked with tears and her hands shaking. "How could you?" she demanded. "How could you do this to your own sister?" I stepped aside to let her in, feeling nothing. "I didn't do anything to Victoria. She did this to herself. She could go to prison. Do you understand that? The lawyer said she could face federal charges." "I'm aware. And you don't care?" I met my mother's eyes steadily. "I care that she forged my signature. I care that she sold property that wasn't hers. I care that she did all of this without once considering how it might affect me. But no, I don't care about the consequences she's facing. She earned them." My mother stared at me like she had never seen me before. In a way she never had. "You're supposed to be family," my mother said, her voice cracking. "Family protects each other. Family doesn't report each other to the government." I walked to my kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. I did not offer my mother anything. "Mom, sit down. We need to talk about what actually happened here." She remained standing, arms crossed, defiant. "I know what happened. Victoria made a mistake, and instead of helping her fix it, you turned her in." "That's not accurate." I leaned against the counter, keeping my voice calm. "Victoria forged my signature to sell property that was under federal oversight. I didn't turn her in. I reported a security breach, which is my job. The fact that my sister caused the breach doesn't change my responsibilities. Federal oversight? It was an old storage building. No, Mom. It wasn't. The words hung in the air between us. My mother's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then to something approaching fear. What do you mean? I took a slow breath. This was the moment I had avoided for 12 years. The moment when my carefully maintained invisibility would finally crack, revealing the truth I had kept hidden from everyone who knew me. My job isn't pushing papers, I said quietly. I work in facility oversight for the federal government. That building Victoria sold was a decommissioned research site that's still under federal jurisdiction. Uncle Gerald was part of the same program before he retired. When he died, oversight of that property transferred to me. My mother sank into a chair, her face pale. You work for... what exactly? I can't tell you specifics, but I can tell you that the property Victoria sold wasn't just an old building. It was a monitored site. And by selling it without authorization, she triggered security protocols that I have no power to stop. Why didn't you ever tell us? The question was so absurd that I almost laughed. When would I have told you? At the dinners where no one asked me a single question about my life. During the family conversations that were always about Victoria. You didn't want to know about my job, Mom. None of you did. You wanted to believe I was boring and unimportant because that was easier than actually paying attention to me. My mother opened her mouth to protest, then closed it again. For perhaps the first time in my life, she had no rebuttal. The building, she finally said. What was it really used for? I can't tell you that either. Can you at least help Victoria? You must have some influence. I've been removed from the case because of our relationship. Even if I wanted to help her, I couldn't. And frankly, Mom, I don't want to. The honesty felt liberating. For years, I had swallowed my resentment, buried my frustration, and played the role of the good daughter who never complained. But that role had gotten me nothing except invisibility and exploitation. That's cruel, my mother whispered. Is it? Victoria forged my signature. She committed fraud. She sold federal property to a buyer who may or may not have known exactly what they were purchasing. These aren't small things. These aren't mistakes that can be fixed with an apology and a dinner invitation. She didn't know what she was doing. That doesn't matter. Ignorance isn't a defense for federal crimes. My mother buried her face in her hands. The sound of her crying filled my small apartment. And I felt nothing. No guilt, no sympathy, no urge to comfort her. Just emptiness where those emotions used to be. What's going to happen to her? She finally asked. I don't know. That depends on the investigation, on what they find about the buyer, on whether Victoria cooperates with the questioning tomorrow. She's scared, Fiona. She called me crying after the agent contacted her. She doesn't understand any of this. Then maybe she should have thought about that before she forged my signature. My mother looked up at me with something that might have been recognition, like she was finally seeing the daughter she had ignored for 35 years and realizing that person was nothing like she had assumed. You're not going to help, she said flatly. Even though you could. I couldn't even if I wanted to. But you're right, I'm not going to try. Why? The question deserved a real answer. I sat down across from her and spoke clearly, without anger or accusation. Just truth. Because for my entire life, I've been the one who fixes things in this family. I've paid debts. I've cleaned up messes. I've let Victoria take credit for things she didn't do and take money she didn't earn. And what have I gotten in return? Nothing. Not a single thank you. Not a single acknowledgement. You treat me like I'm invisible. Like my only purpose is to serve Victoria's needs. And I'm done. My mother stared at me, tears still streaming down her face. We don't treat you like that. Yes, you do. And the fact that you don't even realize it makes it worse. We sat in silence for a long moment. Outside, the city lights of Denver sparkled against the darkening sky. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably panicking, trying to figure out how to talk her way out of this like she had talked her way out of everything else. But there was no talking her way out of federal charges. No amount of charm or tears would move the agents investigating her case. For once in her life, she would have to face consequences that could not be negotiated away. "I should go," my mother said quietly. "Your father is waiting." "Okay." She stood up, then hesitated at the door. "Fiona, I'm sorry for whatever we did that made you feel this way." It was not an apology. Not really. It was an acknowledgement wrapped in denial, a way of saying, "I'm sorry you feel that way," without accepting any responsibility for causing those feelings. But it was more than I had ever gotten before, and I suppose that counted for something. "Goodbye, Mom." She left without another word. I locked the door behind her and returned to my window. The city stretched out below me, full of people living their own complicated lives. Somewhere out there, federal agents were preparing for tomorrow's questioning. Somewhere out there, Victoria was probably rehearsing her excuses. And here I was, finally free of the burden of protecting people who had never protected me. My phone buzzed with one final text from Victoria. "I don't know what kind of job you actually have, but if you have any power to stop this, please, I'm begging you, please help me." I read the message once, then deleted it. Some lessons could only be learned the hard way. The questioning took place on a Tuesday morning at the federal field office downtown. I was not present, but Agent Walsh provided me with updates throughout the day. Victoria had arrived with her lawyer at 9 a.m., looking nervous, but still clinging to her usual confidence. By noon, that confidence had evaporated. "She admitted to forging your signature," Walsh told me during his 2 p.m. call. Her lawyer tried to frame it as a family misunderstanding, but the evidence is clear. We have handwriting analysis, document trails, and testimony from the notary who witnessed the fraudulent signing. "What about the buyer?" "Northgate Holdings." "That's where things get complicated. The company itself is legitimate, but we've traced funding connections to an overseas entity with known intelligence interests. We don't believe your sister was aware of this, but the sale may have been orchestrated by parties who specifically targeted that property." My blood ran cold. "Someone set her up?" "It's possible. We're still investigating. But regardless of how the sale came about, your sister's actions remain criminal. She forged documents and executed an illegal transfer. The buyer's intentions don't change that." I thought about Victoria in that questioning room, slowly realizing that she had been a pawn in something much larger than a simple real estate transaction. For all her scheming and manipulation, she had been manipulated herself. It did not make me feel better, but it did add a layer of complexity to the situation that I had not anticipated. "What happens now?" I asked. "Federal charges are being filed. Forgery, wire fraud, illegal sale of government property. Given that she cooperated with questioning and had no apparent knowledge of the buyer's connections, the prosecutor may be willing to negotiate. But she's looking at significant fines at minimum, possibly prison time." "I see." "Your sister asked about you, by the way, multiple times during the questioning. She wanted to know if you were going to help her, if you had any influence you could use. What did you tell her?" "That you've been removed from the case and have no involvement in the charging decisions. She didn't take it well." I could imagine. Victoria had spent her entire life assuming that someone would always be there to catch her when she fell. The idea that I might finally refuse to play that role was probably incomprehensible to her. "Thank you for the update," I said. "Of course. We'll keep you informed as the case progresses." After we hung up, I sat alone in my apartment and processed what I had learned. Victoria was facing federal charges. The buyer had connections to foreign intelligence. The property Uncle Gerald had left me, the property I had monitored for 8 years, had nearly fallen into the wrong hands. And all of this had happened because my sister saw something she could take and assumed no one would stop her. The irony was not lost on me. For 35 years, I had been invisible to my family. They had looked right through me, dismissed me as boring and unimportant, never bothered to ask what I actually did with my life. That invisibility had protected them from truths they could not have handled. It had also protected classified information and national security protocols. But Victoria's greed had finally exposed what my family's willful ignorance had kept hidden. She had ripped away the veil of my ordinariness and forced everyone to confront the person I actually was. Part of me wished I could feel triumphant about this. Part of me wished I could enjoy watching Victoria finally face consequences for her actions after a lifetime of getting away with everything. But mostly I just felt tired. The next few days brought a steady stream of updates. Victoria was formally charged on Thursday. The news made local papers, though my name was kept out of the coverage. Our parents were devastated, not because of what Victoria had done, but because of the public embarrassment. My phone filled with messages I did not answer, voicemails from my mother, pleading with me to reconsider, texts from my father, demanding to know why I had betrayed my own sister. Even a few contacts from extended family members who had heard about the situation and wanted to weigh in. I deleted them all without reading or listening to them. Victoria's lawyer reached out to me directly on Friday, asking if I would be willing to provide a statement on her behalf. A character reference, essentially, something that might soften the prosecution's stance. I declined politely but firmly. My sister made her choices, I told him. She'll have to live with the consequences. She's facing prison time. Your statement could make a real difference. Then she should have thought about that before she forged my signature. The lawyer fell silent. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, probably trying to think of some argument that would change my mind. He would not find one. "I'll let her know," he finally said. "You do that." The federal investigation continued for 3 more weeks. During that time, I learned more about Northgate Holdings and their connections than I probably should have, given my removal from the case. Walsh kept me informed out of professional courtesy, and what he shared painted a disturbing picture. The company had been specifically interested in that property. They had been monitoring it for years, waiting for an opportunity to acquire it. When Victoria started asking questions about the storage building she believed I had inherited, she had attracted attention from people who saw her greed as an opportunity. Someone had fed her the idea that the property was valuable. Someone had connected her with buyers who were willing to pay far more than the land was worth. Someone had guided her through the process of forging documents and completing a sale that never should have happened. Victoria had thought she was being clever. In reality, she had been manipulated from start to finish. I could have felt sorry for her. A different person might have seen her as a victim, caught up in forces beyond her understanding. But I remembered all the times she had manipulated me, all the times she had taken what she wanted without considering the consequences. She had finally met someone better at the game than she was. The investigation revealed that the overseas entity behind Northgate Holdings had been trying to acquire federal properties for years. The storage building was one of several targets on their list, decommissioned sites that still contained sensitive information or equipment that had never been fully removed. Victoria's sale had been a test case. If it had succeeded without triggering federal attention, they would have moved on to other targets. My sister had nearly enabled a significant security breach, and she had done it for $420,000 and the satisfaction of putting one over on me. When I finally spoke to her, it was at her lawyer's office a month after the initial questioning. She had lost weight, and the dark circles under her eyes suggested she had not been sleeping well. The confident woman who had bragged about her clever real estate deal was gone, replaced by someone who looked genuinely afraid. "I didn't know," she said as soon as I sat down. "You have to believe me. I didn't know what that building was. I thought it was just an old property that you'd forgotten about. You thought it was mine to sell? I thought..." She trailed off, unable to justify her assumptions. "You thought you could take what you wanted because you always have. Because no one ever stopped you." Victoria's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry. I know I should have asked you first. I know I shouldn't have forged the documents. But I was desperate, Fiona. I needed the money. You're always desperate. You've always needed money, and you've always expected someone else to provide it. That's not fair, isn't it? I leaned forward, keeping my voice calm even as decades of frustration pushed against my chest. How many times have I bailed you out, Victoria? How many debts have I paid? How many messes have I cleaned up while you moved on to the next disaster? She had no answer. I was invisible to you, I continued. To Mom and Dad, too. You all looked right through me because I wasn't interesting enough to notice. And when you finally did notice something of mine, something that looked like easy money, you took it without a second thought. I said I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't undo federal charges. Sorry doesn't change what you did. Victoria wiped her eyes with a trembling hand. Can't you help me? You work for these people. You must have some pull. I've been removed from the case because of our relationship. And even if I hadn't been, why would I help you? You've never helped me. You've never even acknowledged that I exist except when you needed something. That's not true. We're sisters. Sharing parents doesn't make us family. Not really. Family supports each other. Family respects each other. You've done neither. She stared at me like I was a stranger. In a way, I was. The sister she thought she knew, the quiet, compliant, boring Fiona who would always be there to clean up her messes, had never really existed. She had just been a convenient fiction that allowed Victoria to take without guilt. The prosecutor is offering a deal, Victoria said quietly. Reduced charges in exchange for testimony about how I was contacted and guided through the sale. My lawyer thinks I should take it. That sounds like the smart choice. I could still face fines. Maybe probation. My reputation is ruined. I felt nothing. You should have thought about that before you committed fraud. Victoria's face crumpled. I can't believe you're being so cold about this. I'm your sister. I stood up, smoothing my jacket. You stopped being my sister a long time ago. I just didn't realize it until now. I left without looking back. The case concluded 6 weeks later with a plea agreement. Victoria pled guilty to forgery and wire fraud in exchange for the federal property charges being dropped. She was sentenced to 5 years probation, 300 hours of community service, and ordered to pay restitution of $200,000, money she did not have. The $420,000 she had received from the sale was seized as evidence and eventually returned to the federal government. Victoria was left with nothing but debt, a criminal record, and the wreckage of her reputation. Our parents tried to help her, of course. They took out a second mortgage on their home to help cover her legal fees and restitution payments. They opened their doors when she could no longer afford her apartment. They defended her to anyone who would listen, insisting that she had been tricked, manipulated, taken advantage of. They never once acknowledged that she had brought this on herself. I watched from a distance, maintaining the boundaries I had finally learned to set. My mother called occasionally, always with updates on Victoria's situation, and always ending with hints that I should do more to help. I listened politely and offered nothing. She's your sister, my mother would say. She needs you. She needed me to be a doormat, I would reply. That's not the same thing. Eventually, the calls became less frequent. The invitations to family dinners stopped coming. I had become a stranger to them, just as they had always been strangers to me. The difference was that now I no longer cared. My work continued. The security breach Victoria had caused led to a comprehensive review of all monitored properties in my region. New protocols were implemented, new safeguards put in place. The people I worked with knew about my family situation in general terms, but no one treated me differently because of it. In my world, following protocol and reporting breaches was expected, regardless of personal connections. 6 months after Victoria's sentencing, I received a letter from her. It was handwritten, several pages long, full of apologies and explanations and promises to do better. She wrote about how the experience had changed her, how she finally understood what she had done wrong, how she hoped we could rebuild our relationship someday. I read it once, then threw it away. Some bridges, once burned, cannot be rebuilt, and some relationships were never real to begin with. Victoria's life continued its downward spiral over the following year. Unable to find legitimate work with a federal conviction on her record, she bounced between low-paying jobs and temporary housing. Our parents' finances were strained to the breaking point by their efforts to support her. The second mortgage they had taken out became a constant source of stress, and I heard through distant relatives that their health was suffering. I felt no satisfaction in watching their struggles, but I felt no guilt either. They had made their choices, just as Victoria had made hers. They had spent decades prioritizing one daughter over another, enabling bad behavior and dismissing legitimate concerns. The consequences they now faced were not my responsibility. My father eventually approached me at a grocery store, of all places. We stood in the produce section, surrounded by apples and oranges, while he asked if I could help them refinance the house. "I can't," I said simply. "Can't or won't?" "Both." He nodded slowly, his face aged by stress and disappointment. "I don't understand what happened to you, Fiona. You used to be such a sweet girl." "I was never sweet, Dad. I was just quiet." "You assumed that meant the same thing." He had no response to that. I finished my shopping and left him standing among the produce, probably wondering where he had gone wrong. The truth was that he had gone wrong decades ago, when he and my mother decided that one daughter mattered and the other did not. Everything that followed had been a consequence of that choice. I never saw Victoria again. I heard updates occasionally. She had moved to another state, was trying to start over, had gotten involved with another questionable business venture. The pattern of her life continued even after everything that had happened. Some people never learn. As for me, I continued my work in quiet anonymity. I monitored facilities, reviewed documentation, maintained security protocols. My colleagues respected me for my competence and dedication. My supervisors valued my judgment and discretion. I had built a life that mattered, even if my family had never recognized it. Looking back on everything that happened, I do not regret my choices. Victoria's actions brought consequences that she had earned through a lifetime of entitlement and manipulation. My decision to report the breach rather than cover it up was simply the right thing to do, both professionally and personally. For 35 years, I had been the invisible sister, the boring one, the family afterthought. But invisibility had taught me patience, and patience had given me strength. When the moment came to finally stand up for myself, I was ready. The revenge, if you could call it that, was not in watching Victoria suffer. It was in finally allowing myself to matter, in setting boundaries that could not be crossed, in recognizing that protecting myself was not selfish, but necessary. My family thought they knew who I was. They were wrong, and that turned out to be their biggest mistake.